Okay. Hello. Welcome to Data Innovation Day 2015. My name is Daniel Castro. I'm the director of the Center for Data Innovation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy think tank in Washington, D.C. that's working to close the gap between the potential of data and where we are today. So we work with policymakers, businesses, nonprofits, and others to come up with public policy ideas that can accelerate data-driven innovation. This is our third year to host Data Innovation Day. The first 2 years we did this as an in-person conference. This year we're experimenting with doing this as an online virtual conference. And the purpose of Data Innovation Day is to engage in a worldwide celebration of the benefits of data and also promote conversations that can lead to better understanding about the opportunities to leverage data for positive social and economic progress. Our goal is to bring together the doers and thinkers involved in data-driven innovation, and really work towards better understanding of the opportunities ahead. Today's event is not intended as a one-way conversation. I encourage you to join the discussion today using the hashtag #DataInnovation. Your questions, comments, and feedback are all highly welcome. So we'll jump right into our first panel today, which is Data for Public Good: Healthcare, Education, Public Safety, and the Environment. The goal of this panel is to explore the positive impact of data on social welfare and the opportunities to do more of this. We have an excellent set of experts joining us today. First, we have Stefan Heek, Executive Director of Samal.org, Alan Inoue, who's the Director of the Office for IT Policy of the American Library Association. We're working to get his audio up and running. Max Richmond, the chapter leader for Datakind DC and Chief Data Scientist at Geopol. Jesse St. Charles, the Director of Data Science at Newton. And Andrew Zaleski, who's a freelance journalist working on open data issues. So welcome to all of you, and to welcome to everyone who's joining us online. So actually, Max, let me start with you. You've been involved in so many different data projects. Looking back over the past year, what are some of the successful projects you've seen in terms of using data for public good?
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everybody. Hope everyone can hear me. A little thumbs up there. Yeah? Working?
Good.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, nice to meet all of you here on the panel, as well as everyone watching from computers and screens of all sizes around the world. Thanks so much for asking the question, inviting me here today to talk about some of the things we've been doing the last year. I guess I'm most proud about two things that I've been able to do here in the last couple of years. In the last year with a group called Datakind, which is a charity based in New York City, but with chapters all around the world, we have helped a number of different organizations become more data-driven by connecting pro bono data scientists with voluntary social sector organizations. In one particular case here we launched a new version of our children's charity tracking tool, which allows the DC Action for Children community to understand how kids are doing, poverty levels, information of that sort. And we built an open source mapping platform with volunteers to help them tell that story, which has subsequently been used by the chapter in the UK, actually, for one of their events. So it's great to be able to build a tool that not only serves the community and kids of DC, but also those in other countries around the world. And secondly, at Geopol, where we're building a platform to send surveys all around the world through the mobile phone, we've been doing extensive work with organizations trying to understand Ebola. We've been working in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, sending surveys every day, trying to understand what's happening, what are the impacts on income, livelihood, etc. So those are some of the exciting, I think, opportunities that we've been working on. So I'll pass it off at that point.
Great. Well, appreciate that, Max. Why don't we go to Stefan? Stefan, you're also working in this kind of broad space of opportunities to use data for social good. What have you seen as being kind of very successful projects in the past year?
Yeah, we've been doing projects over the last year and a half, and Samal.org is a .org or non-profit that has been created by a startup, Samal.com. So the founders from the beginning said, okay, let's build a product, but we know that the power of our technology and the power of our know-how is also applicable to other problems. And I really connected to that thought. I think a lot of us are working in in the business space, and they know their tool or their know-how could be applicable to solve other problems. And we've been very open to projects, and our point was really to demonstrate that data can leverage, is a great leverage and a great tool to have great impact. In terms of concrete projects, very different kinds of projects. We looked at war crimes in Syria. We looked at 120,000 cases.
So we think it's not going to work.
In New York. So just to come back to Syria, so that was about looking at killings in Syria and seeing how people, how casualties occurred, and by using models, we could separate events of battle and events of war crimes. So you can tell in this location, it's most likely a war crime just by the demographics of victims, and in this location, it's probably a battle situation given the weapons and the casualties. So we can actually use statistics to assign responsibility as far as kind of almost to war crimes. And on a very different side, more operational, with the city of New York, we worked on predicting homelessness. We looked at eviction records and shelter entries. I worked together with the city of New York under NDA and sensitive data, and we were able to predict family homelessness or the risk of family homelessness 4 months before it occurs. So the power really is to see, okay, families are in trouble, and we can see that as far as 3 to 4 months before it actually happens, which is a powerful prevention opportunity. And there are many other projects that we looked at, and the application is very different. Sometimes it's operational, and we can predict or we can prevent things. Sometimes we can see institutional bias in courts, and so we're quite open with that. And I want to hand it off. I don't want to talk too much, and give you a taste of what we've done, and we can talk about it later.
Great. No, I appreciate that. So let's stay on this topic for a minute, though. Because you're both working with a number of interesting organizations. How are these organizations finding opportunities to work with data scientists? Nonprofits that are interested in doing something different. In all these cases, these are organizations who, they've had these challenges for a long time, but now they're saying, maybe data can help us. How are they finding you? How are they finding other opportunities to work with data?
Is that a question for me? Or,
it's open to the panel.
Okay.
So please.
Yeah, I'm happily taking it. I think to my senses, and I think Datakind has been really leading the way there, and then really, in a way, really transforming the space. And yeah, it is a tough topic because it's very hard and very costly to do data science, and the outcomes are unknown. So you cannot even say what you're going to get out of it. So it's a very heavy lift to do data science for any project, for a big company or a big organization or a small one. And I really admire the way how Datakind resolved it. I think it has to be some sort of donated time because the cost is so high to come to results. And maybe I need to talk how we did it.
No, I appreciate that, Stefan, and I'm just a volunteer chapter leader as part of Datakind, and I think the real champions, though, are the organizations themselves who take it outside of their busy days and schedules already to try to find talent in very creative ways. In this case, by going to local events, hackathons, and finding volunteers, and that's sort of how Datakind started, was to try to create a better hackathon, if you will. And so when organizations, their eyes light up when they see what's possible from volunteers. So I would encourage organizations interested in tapping into this to also tap into your local communities of geeks and enthusiasts and volunteers. I think it can be very illuminating.
Thanks. And Andrew, you've been working kind of in this civic tech space, so let me bring you in on the conversation here. What kind of success are you seeing in this space? You've been kind of working in Baltimore and in Philadelphia, and I know kind of looking at other cities. So is that outreach going well?
I think that outreach works well in some of these cities when cities manage to pair data with some sort of policy shift. So one of the examples I used in a recent Next City story was about this program, Large Lots in Chicago, and the idea that the city was offering residents the ability to buy a vacant lot for $1, but residents could use an online tool to not only figure out where these vacant lots were in their neighborhood around them, but also actually map where vacants were overall, and then apply straight on the website to be considered to get one of these vacants for $1. So the way that project was framed to me, and the way we framed it in the article was it's sort of like a win-win. It gives the city a chance to put vacant lots back on the property tax rolls. It gives residents in their neighborhoods a chance to move a vacant lot from their neighborhood. Another particularly good example from Philadelphia, and this is something that a local tech site here has been reporting on, Technically Philly. The Philly Police Department in the last year has gotten nearly $1 million in federal grants to do this sort of smart policing. So what does that mean? Say in one of the districts in the city, a police officer is walking down a block and is first able to realize on this particular block that a lot of break-ins are happening. And then after going down the block, sees that all the houses that had break-ins have garages or driveways or back doors. Then the city police districts are able to better figure out, say, where you might want to put officers at a certain time of day, where they might need to patrol a little more often to prevent these break-ins. So, again, coming back to the overall point, I think you see a lot of success with this sort of data stuff in cities when it's actually married with some sort of significant policy change. When it isn't just data for its own sake, hey, look at how many thefts there are, what can we do with this data to actually prevent more burglaries, for example.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, that's true. I mean, in all these cases, we're always talking about data not just for data's sake, but data for improved decision making or some kind of improved outcome. Jesse, let me also bring you in now on this. I mean, you're working in the education space, and so you're kind of straddling all of these areas where you're working with government, you're working with a lot of a lot of nonprofits are in the education space trying to improve this, improve opportunities. There's a big open data movement in education as well, but you're really working on this kind of personalized learning and adaptive learning system. Talk a little bit about kind of where we are with data in education.
Sure. So I think just to echo some of the comments that have already been made, I think a big part of really any data science effort is about really getting specific on the question that you're asking. I think oftentimes we come to big data problems. We're like, oh, there's some value here. Let's dig around until we find it. Versus coming at it with like very specific questions. Like, no, I actually need to answer this one thing. If I can answer this one thing, then I can provide value to a policymaker. I can provide value to an end user. I can provide value to somebody. But it really comes down to building a useful data product. And in the education space, and in the Newton's case, those data products, those questions that we're answering for our users, we're taking that behavioral data that students are generating as they're interacting with educational content, and we're using that to really empower all of those different stakeholders in the education space, whether it be students or teachers or publishers, to make better decisions about what they're doing with respect to their education. So a student, we provide recommendations about what material they would best be experiencing next. We give them more insight into where they're strong and where they're weak. We give instructors insight into what's going on with their classroom, who's strong, who's weak, who's likely to finish an assignment based on the amount of that they're learning and the amount of work that they're putting in, how engaged they are. And then back to the actual publishers who haven't really had a lot of data insight into how their products have been used, like how much learning actually happens as a result of being exposed to this section on FOIL method for factoring equations. That's not been a question that's been able to be answered, but certainly one that everyone's had. And by taking these streams of behavioral data, we're able to really improve the educational experience for everybody. Now, in terms of outreach, that ends up being very tricky because you definitely want to be respectful and hold sacred the kind of relationship that you have with those that are generating that data. In our case, we only use data to benefit our end users. Like there's no selling of the data to anyone else. There's no sharing of our data with others. So I think it ends up being very, very tricky. And so you want to work with public institutions as best you can to help inform policy decisions. But you just have to always make sure that you have consent and the buy-in of those that are generating the data, because they're ultimately the ones that you're trying to benefit and make sure that they're bought into the way their data is being used.
Do you think that in education, parents and students and teachers value this opportunity, or they understand the opportunity of how data can transform education? Because in many fields, it's still a very new concept, and people don't really understand what the potential might be.
Right. So I think that what is challenging is that it's such a new space. It's a new set of tools that that students and teachers are still kind of like, I don't know exactly what to make of this, and I don't know how much I should trust it. I don't know how much I should leverage it in my day-to-day, and that's just going to take being exposed to it. I mean, we have our product and we've had our product experienced by 8 million students so far. So like they're starting to understand, like, oh, okay, it is nice having something that tells me like after I do every little piece of content, what piece of content will benefit me next. So like that's just a generally useful thing. I might choose to ignore it because there might be something else I want to do, but having that guidance, I think, is students are really finding really valuable, and we've gotten that feedback from the classrooms that we're in. So I think the change is coming, and the shift in perception. I think people it's largely a question mark in people's minds right now. So it's a little scary to some people because it's new and they're not sure what it means. But I think the ones that are really kind of like looking at it as just another tool, like another tool in the toolbox to leverage to do your job, and those that are taking that attitude are basically the ones that are playing with it, figuring out what's the right way to implement these tools in the classroom and benefit from them without being scared about what it means for the long term. Just really trying to engage with what value it produces today.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting. I guess let me open this up to the rest of the panel as well, especially when you're working in other fields besides education. Are you seeing that same dynamic? Are you seeing, who are you seeing come to you with, questions about, hey, can I use data in this space, or asking, I've seen it successful over here, can we apply this in my field?
I think just and this isn't necessarily the same sort of thread that we've been talking about, but when it comes to civic hacking communities in cities, I think a lot of the more robust communities in more robust cities, Chicago, Philly, New York City, places of that sort, you routinely have people who aren't just developers showing up at these things. You have policymakers, you have elected officials, you have other civil servants, you have journalists who show up trying to figure out how to use this data. So I think you just see more and more of these sort of outside people or people you wouldn't expect at these sort of gatherings showing up and trying to figure out how you might use data to either help them write an article or help them when it comes to policing or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd also say expectations are being raised by commercial web technologies that are out there. People want the Netflix experience for their business, for their startup, for their social sector organization. Customers are starting to expect the same services from government on par with recommendations for this. You like this, try that. So I think those expectations are putting a bit of pressure on organizations to figure out how to make sure that they're being responsive to their users or customers' expectations.
Yeah, I can. My sense, and we also worked on education type projects, but that's I think one aspect I would like to throw in is who are you going to empower with the data? So especially in education, are you going to empower the students, the teacher, or the organization? So, and then I think we always end up kind of in this conversation, like we don't want to empower the puppeteers, but the community. And then you come to quite transformative applications of data, because our paradigm is dashboards. No, we report up, and the decision makers get better decisions. But I'm not sure if that paradigm is still true. And if this isn't about the community who's actually providing the data, shouldn't they benefit from it? And this seems to come up in a lot of projects where you kind of, if you look carefully, you really have to understand who are you empowering here, and that's a fascinating conversation.
Well, that's a great segue. I want to bring in Alan here. We are going to see if his mic is working, but Alan works with the American Library Association, and so this is a group that's obviously very concerned about ensuring wide community access to technology and the benefits of technology. And so, Alan, as you're seeing this kind of innovation in the data space play out, what's the library response? How are libraries adapting to this, this new phenomena? Librarians are probably kind of the original data scientists. So how are they, how are they adapting to this opportunity to use data for social good? Alan? I'm not sure if we... I
think we lost him.
Yeah, I think we lost his audio. All right, well, so we'll come back to Alan and get his thoughts later. So I want to stick then on this point that we had about, so many, there's so many opportunities here. And Max, as you said, a lot of people are looking to the private sector, and they're saying, look, the private sector has this recommendation algorithm that's working so well, why can't the government do it? Or why can't my school do this for courses? One of the challenges that's been identified in kind of the data space, McKinsey, a market research firm, has indicated that there might be
Can you hear me?
Workers. Yeah, Alan, we can hear you now. Do you want to go back to your question? Yes, Alan, we can hear you. You're on, Alan. Go ahead. Go ahead, Alan. All right, so we're gonna have to come back to Alan later. So going back to this question, the question is basically, if we have a shortage of data science workers in the private sector, how are we going to deal with that in the nonprofit and government sector, where there's these big opportunities? What should we be doing to make sure that the talent is available for these social projects as well as for the business applications?
And that's a fantastic question, and that's something we're trying to resolve. And I think there are two ways to go about it. Is to get access to enterprise technology at a lower price point or for free. So if there is a recommendation engine, getting access is, I think, a great way, and we were quite successful in doing that. And in terms of talent, I would say that there's a lot of desire out there for good talent to do interesting work. So I would say that there's almost an abundance, I think, of talent and ability to solve social problems for people who are maybe having other jobs and skill. So that's at least my perspective. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's I think there is a lot of energy out there, and it's really a matter of channeling and putting that power.
It seems like to me that that one of the roles that we've seen government play so far has been as a data curator and a data source that New York has done a reasonable job of this of trying to make some city data openly available so that so the private sector can try to leverage that to bring value back to the kind of inhabitants of that city. Obviously, there are tricks to be had there in terms of privacy and kind of constraining some of the things that could be done with that data that might end up harming some members of that community. But that at least helps to, I think, constrain the problem that government has to solve, and just like how well, because they have, oftentimes governments have in some ways unprecedented access to different kinds of data sources. In terms of sensor networks, it might be through public utility system, or through public schools, or through transit networks. Like there's data that no one else has access to, that governments have access to, and figuring out, like, really focusing on how to expose that in a safe way that can be leveraged by the private sector to benefit that community, I think is an important place to focus a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, do you want to add anything to that, especially on this question of open data and how government, when you're looking at these, especially local governments, federal government, so many governments have this data. How are those conversations shaping out right now in terms of what they're deciding to invest in opening up or making available to third parties, or even just modernizing their IT infrastructure so that it can be used?
Yeah, I mean, I like Jesse's comment about government sort of acting as a data curator, which is certainly one thing that they're doing just by opening up data sets themselves. I think probably what will happen in municipal governments, at least in the U.S., I can't speak for other countries, but agencies will start using this information with one another. So one of the example here is one that we used in the next city story. Mark Head, the first chief data officer in Philadelphia, would often lament that there were 3 separate websites people had to go to just to get the full property tax picture of one property in the city of Philadelphia. So what would happen if those 3 city agencies actually shared the data with one another and put it all together and located it in one easy-to-read, accessible file online, versus a user, a city resident, having to go to 3 different websites just to get all the information they might want on their own house or some piece of property, say they're interested in buying because they saw it was for sale. So I think that'll be where the conversation within cities changes. When it comes to open data, it'll be municipal governments working inside themselves, working inter-agency and intra-agency to share this data and come up with better ways of just running their own offices, more efficient ways of doing that, and better ways of communicating with one another, talking with one another to figure out certain things.
Yeah, I would like to echo Jess's point of sharing more sensitive data around that cities have, and I think that's probably a touchy area, because to us, at least what we saw from our homelessness prediction project, is that a lot of innovation can come from case-level data that is obviously very potentially quite sensitive. And I wonder if there's some mechanism for cities to safely share this kind of data, and for innovators to safely innovate on that. I think my sense is that open data obviously is not sensitive, but a lot of innovation can come from working with school records or other kinds of data. I haven't quite wrapped my head around it, but I think that's where innovation is right now. It's very hard for everyone to embrace that.
And where the data is getting more mature, we can build more reliable services on top of them. And that was really the innovation for 2014 with the DC Action for Children project with Datakind, is that instead of what we did the first time we did the project, which was pull all the data sets onto our local desktop, manipulate the data, and analyze it, we actually built web services that pull that data directly from the Census Bureau's API. So with the flip of a button in December, we're able to update from the 2012 up to the 2013 American Community Census updates. So it's possible as government, as Andrew said, becomes more of a curator and really thinks about the users of their data to make those more into pipes to power tools that are leveraging that information.
I think those are great points. One thing that we've really been talking about at the center is how government can start thinking about building platforms for innovation around data. And that we want, if you look kind of historically at e-government and where governments were spending their money, they were, the innovation was building the IT system. It was building, building the data warehouse. It was even having, having the ability to have this information collected and stored somewhere. But the next wave of innovation really needs to be about opening up this data to third parties, and not necessarily everything is open data, but having platforms where you can have third-party developers come in and say, using this data that's out there, here's how we can innovate. So a great example of this would be the HHS and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid. That, they have all this payment data for doctors, and you want to use that data to try and figure out where is fraud. They have one algorithm they're using now to do this, but in theory, you want to really open that up so other developers, other data scientists can come in and say, we can make this incremental improvement, and if we can make that improvement, you'll pay us because it's worth it to everybody. And you want to have that kind of positive feedback loop in innovation, and I suspect you would want to see that in other areas like education. I'll put it on Jesse here to see if that holds true.
So I think I generally agree that by doing that you are enabling providing the capability for someone to come in and add more value to that. I think where it gets kind of dicey is figuring out how to go about responsibly restricting access to those data sets. And we look at something that's not education related, but more general. There was a taxi data set that was anonymized and released here in New York. It had some weaker encryption to it, so there was some amount of de-anonymization that was able to be done. And when it was joined with Google image data sets, there was actually, they were able to identify specific celebrities and what kind of taxi rides they had taken through the city on particular days, because they were able to resolve medallion numbers out of the original data set. And so, even something that seems like we've done a good job of anonymizing and securing. There's enough data out there that being joined in particular ways, you can end up with unforeseen consequences. I think that's going to be the hardest thing for an open data movement is that like it's probably can't for a lot of things, for maybe even most things. It may not be able to be open data. It may be like kind of vetted actor data where you can participate and try to be able to work with this data as long as you are constrained in the ways you can use it, and you've been vetted by somebody to say that you're kind of a responsible actor in the space. Yeah.
No, I think you make a good point. I mean, and when we talk about openness, we have, especially, we're a nonprofit based in DC, so we're all around federal government. Federal government buildings are generally open. I mean, the point is that it's accessible to the people. That doesn't mean there's not security at the door. That doesn't mean there's not metal detectors. And so, I think we're finding what are the metal detectors that we want for open data? What kind of safeguards do we want to have in place? And really, how do we go about equipping government, especially maybe city and smaller local governments that don't have a lot of resources? How do we give them these tools so that they can move forward with that? And I'd love to get Andrew, your reaction to this, because I know you're working in this space.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's so much a tool per se. I just think there's a reason why municipal governments need to move a little more slowly, even to the chagrin of you know, I don't know, maybe the people who might be a little more anarchist when it comes to open data, and that's just because municipal governments have to worry about some of the concerns that Jesse just spoke about generally. You know, you don't want to be releasing a city's health services data. It might do a lot of good in the aggregate, but you certainly don't want to be releasing individual information like that. So I think when it comes to a city government, it isn't necessarily a tool. It's just city governments figuring out the exact process by which they can find the data themselves, be able to comb through it efficiently and quickly and figure out what could be useful to give to people versus just doing one general dump of data and saying, here, take it and see what you can make out of it. And that just takes time. You know, you got to convince agencies that this is something that's worthwhile to do. You have to get buy-in from city officials, and then you know, sometimes what municipal governments struggle with are outdated IT systems. You know, in Baltimore, there was a story that the previous chief technology officer related, talking about how some of their server infrastructure dated back to the 80s, and it was clunky and not. I mean, it was just very difficult to get any sort of data to the public in a timely fashion. So. Yeah, when it comes to cities, it isn't necessarily a tech tool. I think it's more a matter of they're figuring out their own processes by which they can give people data, make sure it isn't data that could compromise someone's identity, say, and then be able to sort of integrate that in with the various departments within the city government.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And so we're gonna try Alan one last time and see if this works. So Alan, I want to go to you and ask you, this question about what's the role of libraries as a community institution, and we still need to unmute you if you can manage that. There you go. Go ahead.
Okay now?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Great. So first, I deeply apologize for all these technical problems. I'm not sure exactly what, I guess there must be some hardware problem here with this machine. Anyway, so Daniel asked me to address the question of the data revolution and the impact on the future of libraries. And so the answer is that it's quite profound. And so, data are the new collections, or at least that's kind of the direction that we're headed, as opposed to, books thinking of libraries from the 20th century. And so just think about some of the big data stores. For example, the Digital Sky Survey at Johns Hopkins University, a huge data set of optical telescope collecting data from the sky, or the big Twitter archive at the Library of Congress. All the tweets, there's several hundred billions of tweets in there, and so just think about these kinds of big data stores happening. In terms of the services that libraries provide right now, for example, Duke University, there's a data and visualization services department that helps folks, researchers, find data, provide facilities and advice on data storage and management, visualization, specialized software, GIS, mapping, data cleaning, all these kinds of topics that, of course, is not what you think about in your old-fashioned library. And indeed, in library schools of past, now there are actually data-oriented programs. One of the newest ones is at the University of California at Berkeley. There's a master's program in information and data science, which is actually offered only online. So things have changed a lot in the past decades, from old-fashioned librarianship to the digital age and Google and social media, and now to data. So there's a lot going on there. In terms of public libraries, you could think about it in terms of one is digital literacy as a place. So libraries have always had this traditional role of helping the public learn about new technologies. And so, and still today, there are still classes on how to use email and how to use browsers and basic computer hardware. But there are also classes on much more advanced topics. So think about that as a place to, for people to learn about technology, and of course to access technology. Nowadays, even public libraries are pushing to get gigabit connections and such. So think of that as a resource of places where where users may come to use the great innovative products and services that you and PANS develop. So there's that aspect to it. There's also an education and awareness aspect. So, for example, in programming and services, one example happened at the Chicago Public Library last year, where some students and faculty came in and did demonstrations about big data projects and what they're doing there. So one is to get the public more aware of this kind of work and the possibilities, and get that excitement, and also to get children excited about it too. The next generation of people who may be working in this area. I think the last thing I might mention quickly is just also think about libraries as resources for entrepreneurship and small business. Think about all the resources that libraries provide, but also an increasing number offer specific resources on entrepreneurship services, in terms of information resources, meeting spaces, how to meet up with people, all kinds of things like that, including even seminars on doing business plans. One library, Brooklyn Public Library, actually has a contest of the best business plan of the year, and there's a cash award for that, and that's actually in the public library. There's a couple public libraries in Arizona, in Goodyear and Scottsdale, that have similar kinds of entrepreneurship centers. So for small business, new entrepreneurs, that's please keep that in mind. Or just in general, collaborations with libraries as places where if you want to talk to people who are interested in technology and it's kind of general public, a place to do some experiments, focus groups, that kind of thing. It's about libraries in kind of a myriad number of ways, and I think I should stop there. And thanks, Dan, for tolerating this whole chaos over here that we have with technology at this moment. Sorry.
No problem, and thank you so much, Alan. Really glad to have you part of this conversation, because as I think we've heard today, so much of when we're talking about data-driven innovation, it's about the technologists coming together with the people that have problems, and working together to find solutions. And libraries are these community-based institutions that are available with technology, with computing power, with the internet connection. They have facilities. They really might have this important role to play as the place where people can meet, as the place where we can have hackathons and we can have civic development. And it'll be interesting to see if libraries do converge on this new wave of innovation and the role that they might play and how they might help this movement going forward. So I'm really glad you're able to be part of this conversation. So we had a question come in on Twitter that I want to pose to the group. And again, if you'd like to submit questions, just use the hashtag data innovation. Throughout the day, we'll be taking questions as well as comments and feedback. So one question that came in was about accessibility for people with disabilities. And the question was, how is accessibility for people with disabilities being encouraged through data-driven innovation? So let me just open this up to the panel and say, in all these different projects that you're working on, how are people with disabilities and their needs being kept in mind as we're seeing this type of innovation? Who wants to go first?
I think there's a huge space to be thinking about inclusiveness in not just access, but really equality in the conversation about what's happening with data. Data puts people in power in greater power and puts people who are vulnerable in greater vulnerability. So it's incredibly important to make sure you're having a conversation and realizing at the end of the day all this data is really that we're interested in is mostly focused about people. So bearing that in mind and making sure that we're always being very responsible with the information that we're using, and that our own personal data is somebody else's business data and somebody's business data is our personal data. But I think generally finding ways to make this technologies and tools more accessible. I think you're seeing it play out every day. People who are going above and beyond what the federal requirements are for making data accessible to people with vision impairment, to making other ways to explore data through to more tactile means. I think there are some really creative ways that people are engaging a broader pool of people. And I would say as well, while our panel here is largely of a certain gender and ethnic composition, I think there's a broader pool of people out there that are engaged in this kind of work and finding ways to continue to engage women, engage people of color, particularly is important when grappling with how to make use of this data to improve our societies.
Great. Thank you, Max. Does anyone else on the panel want to comment on this?
I can throw something in. I think one of the kind of the general evolutions that I've seen in big data is like the very first set of value that people start to generate from looking at large amounts of data is making population level generalizations, right? So if we think of the Census Bureau in the U.S. having been the first large aggregator of information in the country, and then the government trying to leverage that information to make good policy decisions, they're making those judgments with looking at the averages of a population or these general aggregate statistics. And while that's a better view than nothing, it definitely underserves anyone who deviates substantially from what is average, right? But fortunately, I think the promises that come from big data, and actually what we're seeing here at Newton, is that it's not about finding a pattern that applies to everybody. It's about finding something that really is personalized and benefits an individual where they are, right? And so the power of big data is to actually start collecting, getting at data about an individual, regardless of how similar or different they are from the rest of the population, but really kind of getting to their needs where they are. So whether we classify that kind of federally as disability or not, it's just different. It's behaviors that are different than another segment of the population. And if we just think of it as human behavior on a spectrum, and what our task, part of our task as people in the big data space is to actually to meet people where they live, regardless of where that is, right? And then I think that we go from this crude and potentially damaging place of making generalizations and population level generalizations that no one really fits well to a place where really we're leveraging data to serve every individual as best as possible.
Great. No, that's a great point and a great place to stop on this panel, because as we said at the beginning, data is always about making better decision making, and it's also about personalization, and that's a big part of what we're seeing and how it's helping a wide range of individuals. So Data Innovation Day is continuing. We're going to be moving on to our second panel. If you're watching on the website, just scroll down and you'll see a new video feed, and that will start up in about 1 minute. And I'd like to thank everyone on this panel for joining me today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you.